welcome to the Booster Pack. This is the show where we unwrap the stories and crack the mysteries of collectible game history. My name is Rands, and we're going to do just that and more today. Let me tell you how we're going to get there. Today, we have a guest whom, for the better part of the last 35 years, has amassed near limitless amounts of professional experience in tabletop gaming. His career has hit every corner of the industry, from humble beginnings as a retail store clerk to a product manager at one of the 90s largest distributors of hobby games, to a designer of board games, role-playing games, and miniatures games in his own right. Not to mention, he is currently one of the industry's most respected and most admired local game store operators. Now, as if all of that isn't enough to talk to someone about, there's something I've left out, a huge piece that we're going to cover today as well. Back in the CCG heyday of its first couple of years of the hobby, this gentleman was one of the most prolific designers that the games ever saw. He gave us some of the most recognizable games of the 1990s, like the Crow CCG, 007 CCG, and DoomTrooper, just to name a few. Now, with all that said, allow me to introduce a guest that I'm extremely excited and delighted to talk to, Bryan Winter. Bryan, how are you?
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Well, what we'll do is let's dig in. Now, obviously, like I said, you have a big resume, but let's dig into a time before that. What's your secret origin, if you will? How did you fall in love with tabletop gaming before you were in the industry itself?
I lived in a very small town in Ohio called Madison, Ohio. And there was a bike store, a bike and hobby store that is no longer there, but it was owned by a friend of mine when I was a kid, and they had Dungeons and Dragons and Avalon Hill games. It was quite literally a shelf about that big, right? And that was all it was. And I rode my bike down to that store constantly and saved all my pennies and bought a bunch of stuff. And so that's kind of where I got into it all. And then it just sort of stuck with me through my whole life.
That's a familiar story. I love to hear that that you've gone from being able to shop from a shelf like this to a giant store behind you where it's shelves upon shelves upon shelves of those same kind of games.
I'm in one of my stores right now. I'm in the back room where we normally would have tables and chairs for gaming, but since the coronavirus, it has been converted into miniatures and puzzles. And there's a whole nother room over there that has more of the board games and things like that. So
you're gonna have more storage space and you're gonna know what to do with.
The problem is when we eventually open back up for gaming again, I have to figure out where all this stuff is going to go over on that side. So
yeah, it's going to be a tight squeeze.
It's going to be tight. We've got some rearranging plans. So.
Fantastic. So in those early days, when you're, shopping off a bike store shelf for board games and RPGs and stuff, were you dreaming of wanting to make them one day?
No, because that was not a thing that you even, they just were, there was like 6 of them. And so you didn't think that there would be an industry. This was just, oh, isn't this an interest? This is very much different from the board games that I'm used to. And so no, I really never thought of that specifically. Not until really I got into probably, I got into high school and I kind of put pause on a lot of that game stuff and into college, and I'm just kind of going into school. And then late in my college career, I got a job at a hobby store that had a much bigger games department. It was 2 whole shelves. And I got, much more engaged in that. And then I started hooking up with some industry people and doing convention help and things like that. And then I started thinking, maybe I can give that a try. And eventually I was doing some, play testing and convention booth help and that kind of thing. Heartbreaker Hobbies through Target AB from Sweden and their US partner Heartbreaker Hobbies had some games that they were working on, and there was one that they were having there was a tough nut they just couldn't crack. If you recall the Mutant Chronicles Siege of the Citadel board game that Pressman made. It was kind of a big box game back in the 90s. They wanted to do a follow-up to that game, and the design that they had going wasn't really going anywhere. So one of my first design challenges was to they basically said, we want to take a crack at this. And it was going to be a follow-up sequel to this game. And they basically, and it was a really interesting problem because I didn't come up with the design. They presented me with the materials. They said, you have these exact figures, you have these exact dice, you have exactly this much cardboard.
Wow.
Make a game out of it, and it's got to be a companion to this other game. So that, I mean, I had done a couple of things before that, but that was the one where I was like, okay, this is a job.
Wow. Okay, so you're in the games industry. You've obviously just started. You're excited. You've made your first game. Maybe your mind's starting to trickle to things that you could do next. And all of a sudden, this is I guess about 92 with Heartbreaker Hobbies, which is the company that we'll get to later. A big seismic earthquake hits the hobby gaming industry about the following year. Now, tell me about that. You're one of the few people who was in the industry that I've interviewed when collectible card games hit the scene in 1993. What do you remember from that origin?
I'll tell you a story that's even before that. So, before before I was doing all this, I was working at a company called Capital City Distribution, which was one of the country's biggest distributors of comic books and trading cards and pop culture stuff. And I was the games product manager for them. So if anyone knows Diamond Comics and previews and things like that, it was like that. We had a tiny little customer, vendor who made board games, not very many, but they made a couple of card games, and they were called Wizards of the Coast. And they had made some role-playing supplements, and they made some little like battle fighting card game where you're all like a warrior and you play weapons and things like that. It had nothing to do with magic. I remember the cards were perforated. You had to, punch them off of a sheet and things like that. And Lisa Stevens knew of us and knew that we were we sell a lot of games, but we also were one of the country's leading supplier of trading cards. And back then that was baseball cards and that kind of thing. So she set up a meeting with us and with me and one of our card product people and said, so we have this idea and we want to sell this game and we're going to sell it like trading cards. And we kind of went, okay, that sounds pretty cool. And we had about a 3-hour meeting where she basically picked our minds on how the trading card industry worked and how expectations are as far as packaging and in the packs distribution and rarities and all that other kind of stuff and how things are packaged and how things are, you look now at what we, a booster box is just vernacular now. Everyone knows what a booster box is, but back then, that was sort of new, new stuff. And so she wrote a lot of notes. And then a year later, Magic came out. We were a little, and I think, and at the time I thought maybe I should have asked for a job, because I like to sort of humbly say that I was involved at the very early stages in some capacity with Magic and how it was sort of how it came to market. It was very interesting. Yeah. And then it came, and like you said, it was a seismic thing. So to what you were saying, what happened then? Well, the entire industry, you could hear the screeching of the brakes as everyone shifted their focus into this new thing for good and for bad. If you were around back then, that it turned into quite a glut. And I was fortunate to get in on the ground floor. We were the first sort of other game, one of the first other games to come out after Magic, Wyvern and things like that beat us to it. And we also had the advantage of that international partnership with Target AB, which I know you're going to get to in a bit, that got us like first into a lot of countries and things like that. So it was this weird sort of, merging of luck and skill and right place at the right time and having the properties that are interesting and malleable enough that you can take them and make them work in this new format in interesting ways. So
okay, so this seismic earthquake hits, so to speak, and you are given the task. I assume the conversation shifts pretty soon at the Target and Heartbreaker offices to how are we going to do what this is doing? Like, I assume there's skepticism at first, but within months, they figure out everything's selling out more than they've ever sold out before. So what are those first conversations like? What is there other people pitching ideas, or was it something that they were at first going, let's just see how this goes? Because your game comes out pretty quick. Your game, which is DoomTrooper, for anybody who doesn't know, is based on the Mutant Chronicles franchise we mentioned earlier, comes out pretty quickly. So I just want to get an idea of how things sort of went and what your first impressions of a CCG were personally. So what did you think as somebody who'd come from the miniatures and the RPG side of things? What did you think of this new format?
It was very interesting. It was, I had, I sat down with whatever, games I could get at the time, and played them and tried them and sort of looked at and tried to try to sort of deconstruct them a little bit. What did I like? What didn't I like? And it wasn't like a lot of people said, well, let's make a CCG. Everyone start pitching things. Maybe it's because it's been a long time, but I recall that they came to me and said, okay, we're going to make one, go. Mm-hmm. So they also had in Sweden, they had a lot of this property already made, and Heartbreaker had already done a big job of pushing a lot of their existing product into the market. So they had a role-playing game already, several expansions. They had a miniatures game. They had a huge amount of artwork. They had all of the background material, and they basically just dumped it in my lap and said, make a card game. Mm-hmm. So then it was my task to sit there and sort of figure out, okay, how am I going to take all of these assets? And it was literally just a bunch of art and role-playing books and things like that. And me pulling out pieces of, oh, that's a piece of art that I can use. A lot of times it's, I had the card idea or and then, we found art to go with it. Other times we had a piece of art and I made a thing to go with that piece of art. There's a story of, what was his name? Stefan? I want to say, again, it's been a long time, and my apologies to anyone that I forgot. Going through their big sheets of artwork in Sweden with a toilet paper roll tube. And because the DoomTrooper art was all circles, right? Yeah. And so he would just kind of go over the art and find cool segments of circle art. Yeah, you can see it behind you right there. Yeah. Like this. Exactly. It's like, oh, we can take that piece and blow it up or shrink it down and make it into this cool circle. So he's using this. So when you look at early DoomTrooper cards, you see like this sort of like, this like blobby heart looking thing. And that was just taken from the background of another picture. So if you take a look at, if you know the Mutant Chronicles art, and you look at the early DoomTrooper cards, there's probably 6 or 7 cards that all the art is coming from one piece of art this big, where they took a little chunk here and a little chunk there and a little chunk there. So yeah, that was sort of the development aspect of it, of being able to just take the assets that we already had. And then for me, it was the thing of taking the things that I liked and didn't like and sort of adapting them. There were a few things that I was instructed. So in Magic, you may know that you're allowed to have up to 4 copies of a single card in your deck. Well, Target said, make it 5. Because they wanted to sell more packs, right? It's a marketing gimmick, It was a marketing thing. It's like, oh, I can have 5 things on my deck. And then, so they're thinking, oh, they'll chase more cards and that kind of thing. I mean, we were learning as we were going. A lot of those early, things that we figured out, that we figured out what worked and figured out what didn't. And then as I became more prolific and moved on to other collectible card games, I was able to sort of, everyone sort of grew off of the one before it. So yeah. That's
amazing. So what I want to know then is, you're obviously reverse engineering collectible card games at this point, going, oh, this is how you put rares on a sheet. Did you ever contact anybody at Wizards and ask for a return of that favor?
No, never did. No, it was, I suppose I could have, but that would have felt kind of awkward. They were like going a mile a minute at a time. I didn't want to bother Lisa. I'm sure she would have taken my call. At the time, she probably would have remembered me. I don't know if she remembers me now.
That's so interesting, because I think maybe if you had done that, DoomTrooper comes out as a different game, because you're reverse engineering and adding your own experience and your own, miniature and board gaming sort of language to it, rather than taking it directly from the CCG sort of Magic the Gathering thing. DoomTrooper might not have been as so distinct, because it is so unique, especially considering when you look at the other things that were coming out around that late 1994, early 1995, and into 1995, a lot of them do sort of borrow, especially from some of the smaller companies, what Magic was at a baseline.
And I think that's certainly a natural progression. You look at a game and you sort of change that game into something that you make it advanced, or you make it simpler, or you kind of give it a little thing. I had just come off of miniatures, of Warzone. I wasn't a developer on Warzone, but I had the stuff, and tactical miniature board game, which was Siege of the Citadel, Fear of the Klansman. And so Mutant Chronicles is a game about big, stupid guns, crazy shoulder pad armor, and magic spells, and this weird, like, hyper Catholicism versus these corporate, entities. And it's just this crazy setting. I love it.
Conan meets Commando in space.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's very Swedish. But at its core, you have a game that is just all these pictures, and this artwork is just, big shoulder pad dudes and great big guns and crazy things. And like, this has got to be a fighting game. This has got to be soldiers. This has got to be warriors and weapons and blowing stuff up and using magic spells and that kind of thing. So, so where other people were looking at the sort of costs, the sort of, resource management and creating a little thing and attacking each other, I was like, let's put, instead of me attacking you and the cards represent the stuff that we're using to fight each other, let's just be the commanders, and here's the battlefield, and let's put dudes down and have them blow each other up for points. And that's what it was. Yeah. And so we came up, with two different currencies, the destiny points and the promotion points, which are the victory points. And we tried not to tie all that into the cards themselves. We weren't afraid of having, markers and coins and all that kind of stuff. And we just tried to make a fighting game. And there really wasn't, like you said, there really wasn't that much out there like that at the time.
I love it. I just want to call out there, you actually mentioned that you didn't want to do that sort of building resource system in the same way that, say, Magic did, where it gets more and more as it progresses. And in fact, I think anybody who hasn't tried it, maybe it's just due to its maybe Swedish roots or something like that, but I always look at it as sort of more like a proto-Euro of a collectible card game, because you've got this resource management, because the mechanic, I believe, is every time you defeat someone, you can either gain victory points or you can use it as a resource.
Or you can get money, to buy other stuff.
It's, do I want to advance my victory, or do I want to advance my army for a victory later? It's very like resource management-y, more like a Euro board game than you would see in a traditional CCG.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. And later on with the follow-up to DoomTrooper, which was Dark Eden, I really took that and cranked that aspect, that Euro-y kind of aspect up.
I love it because it does stand out. And I think that's one of the things that, obviously it's a unique theme, but I do think it was one of the things that helped propel it, be that point of difference, especially for that European audience.
One of the big assets that we had was that artwork. And one of the reasons that we were able to strike so hard, so quickly, the picture that you have right up behind your head here of this early ad that was out months before the game released, we got so much buzz off that because our artwork was so great. I mean, you look at it now, with many years later, and it looks pretty okay, fine. But at the time, this artwork was amazing. Paul Bonner is an amazing artist, and they had a lot of great. He got a lot of great work from him, and they just took advantage of those assets as much as possible. The other big advantage that we had was Target's international connections, and so DoomTrooper very quickly was put into 16 different languages. And we were the first collectible card game in most of the world we were in Hebrew, we were in Hungarian, we were in Japanese, we were in Czech, we were in Polish, and to this day there still are little pockets, especially in Poland. Poland is still crazy about DoomTrooper, that where we were able to really make that first in the market impression, which is so important. So anyway.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I do want to call out there. Just obviously the art is fantastic, and it hadn't saturated the hobby industry in the US the same way that it had overseas. It was only a relatively new thing, and people weren't tired of it. A game like TSR's Spellfire, which recycled Dungeons and Dragons art, had been seen for years, if not a decade or more at that point. And I think that certainly helped the uniqueness and the quality of that art certainly helped DoomTrooper as well as those unique mechanics. I loved it.
It did. Yeah.
We've talked about the production. We've talked about the design and development of the game mechanics itself. Let's talk about that launch that you mentioned, the international launch and the English launch. Sure. So what was it like? You were this game designer who had done that one game before, and all of a sudden you have an international hit, not just a national hit, but an international hit.
Yeah.
It was in countries that Magic hadn't even visited yet.
I know that it was very exciting time. I was getting mostly just third-party hearsay stuff. I was just the designer, and it's very exciting, and I'm getting paid, and I got rid of all my debt, and and I got to buy a car. I'm just in my mid-20s at the time, right? It was this is great. And it got to a point where, I quit my job and I said, yes, I can do this full time, and be a full-time game designer, which I was for a while, as a freelancer. And it was great. It was really, really great. The times where I was able to sort of, be a little bit more of the celebrity, I guess, is, have you heard of the Lucca Game Fair? It's in Lucca, Italy. And I got to be, they called and they said, you want to be the guest of honor. Are you kidding? Yeah. So,
wow.
So this was sort of tied in with the Italian distributor and all that kind of stuff.
Interesting you should say that, because I guess Magic wouldn't have hit Italy.
We got there just about the same time,
Okay.
Yeah. But it was a big deal. And so I got there and I got to be at the Lucca Game Fair for a few days. And my wife and I got to spend a little extra time being just tourists. And it was fantastic. The other big thing is, shortly, a few years afterwards, we had the one and only DoomTrooper World Championship in Sweden, and I got to go out for that and sort of sit and watch the proceedings, and we had everyone had sort of a national champion, and they all went to Sweden to play for the World Championship, and that only happened one time. A guy from Spain won, I want to say. So yeah.
Did you get to hand out the trophy?
I did. Yeah, I signed a lot of cards.
Fantastic.
And yeah. Everyone, it's weird to think about this, especially a lot of CCG fans, but the final decks, to make sure that they were not cheating or anything like that, they literally took their decks and they took a stamp that they made, which had the cardinal symbol on it, and they literally ink stamped the face of every single card in the finalist decks. So their cards had these inks. It's like taking your I don't know, like a Mox or a or a Black Lotus and putting a stamp on it. Nothing you would do these days. This is back before sleeves were a thing and all that kind of stuff. So
that's fantastic, because it also means that those two decks still exist somewhere. If it was only the finalists in completion, and they can be identified as the exact cards that won the world tournament.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so you said that you're able to quit your job and you can live the game design dream. You're like, oh my God, one game made me a car. What's the next one going to make me? So the Heartbreaker and Target go, all right, well, this is great. What else have you got? What happens? You are, like I said, one of the most prolific. So a couple of other games come down the line. DoomTrooper's out, doing well. You are getting from hearsay.
And I'm making expansions for that at a rabbit's pace. Yeah, I'm making expansions as quickly as possible for DoomTrooper. Meanwhile, other games are coming up as well. Yeah.
So that's a good question. Actually, let's just jump in there just for a minute. Let's just put a pin in my previous question. Where were you with the expansions? Like your fingerprints are on them in their entirety? Like every expansion was from you?
Mostly. I would say mostly. We would have people, there would be some things would happen where they would present me with new artwork and say, here, make cards out of this, right? And so sometimes the first expansion, which was Inquisition, which was okay and overprinted, and it had some issues, but they basically said, we have all the rest of this artwork, let's make that. And then the next expansion after that, which I want to say was Warzone, that's where we got to get into some new mechanics and things like that. But in that time, some new role-playing books had come out, some new stuff had come out, and they had a whole cadre of new art. And so we were able to say, all right, more guns, more weapons, more tanks, more dudes. And so a lot of the artwork drove a lot of the mechanics.
And let's jump back to what was going on during this time while DoomTrooper is succeeding the way it is. Let's talk about what was happening with a couple of other games that even I mentioned in the introduction. Some licensed games start to come from big Hollywood properties. Tell me what, because you're actually most prolific is probably an understatement, because you actually have 3 games released in a single month, which I don't think any other designer has ever done before, since, or will.
Yeah, I guess that's true, isn't it? Yeah. It all kind of felt I was working a lot. I was just sitting, I'd wake up, I'd stumble over to the computer, I'd type all day long, and I'd just kind of fall back asleep. And I wouldn't. I'd be laying in bed and thinking of new card ideas and mechanics and all that kind of stuff.
Wake up in the middle of the night, scribble it down.
So we got James Bond, we got The Crow, and with those each one came a brand new design problem. I'll talk about The Crow first. Mm-hmm. The Crow was a very interesting problem, because it was a problem that stemmed from how the game was going to be packaged and marketed. There were going to be starter sets with The Crow. And that was one of the reasons it didn't do very well, because everyone didn't buy the booster packs because they couldn't find the starter sets, not knowing that there were no starter sets to be made. So the design problem that was presented to me, and I don't know if this came from the Crow people or if it came from Target or and their ideas of how this stuff would be sold. I think they were thinking much more mass market. So we had to. So my one major instruction was, you have to be able to open up one booster pack and play the game. Not a great version of that game, but you should be able to play the game. And so when you look at The Crow, you see a collectible card game that is boiled down to its core elements: people, places, things, and how they interact and how they fight each other. And again, it's another battle game. One stat, one number, and that was a revelation. I never went back to multiple stat cards. Your number is your number, right? And it had to be relatively playable out of one booster pack. Every booster pack contained the rules. So the rules had to be very succinct and very short, just to fit on a little flyer. And then as you collect more cards, it became a much more robust game. So one of the things I had to do is, okay, I can't presume anything. I can't presume that they have coins and quarters. I can't explain the resource system. So I came up with this system, which at the time I think was pretty unique, and I'm sure it's been done since then. But in order to play a card, the money for that card was the number on the other cards. So if I wanted to put out an 8 guy, I had to discard 8 points worth of other cards. So if I wanted to bring out a bomb, I'm going to have to empty my hand, or I can spend those points on getting lots of little guys out. And that turned out really, really well. It was a tight little game. It worked great. And you had good guys and bad guys, and it just kind of died because no one understood the marketing of it, the how it was presented and packaged and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of came and went. It was one print run. It went out and it went away. But I always have fond memories of Crow. It's a simple little kind of throwaway game, but it's got some really great little design aspects that I'm super happy with.
That's fantastic. It's like a limited first style play rather than the constructed style play that you usually see with most games. DoomTrooper and almost every other CCG is it's a limited first game, and I really do. Yeah,
it's like drafting before there was drafting or something like that. But there was like 16 cards in the package or something like that, and I would take 8, you would take 8, and we'd fight each other. So we had to make sure that there was enough warriors in there to fight each other, and it was crazy.
That's hilarious.
James Bond was much more ambitious. James Bond, we had access to the entire James Bond catalog. We had all the movies except for Casino Royale at the time and things like that, the old 60s Casino Royale.
Right.
But we I didn't get to do it. I'm sick to death that I was not able to do it, but there was a group of people that got to go to London and dig through the James Bond archives.
Go to
the studio and and look at all the props and take pictures and things like that. Yeah, there's a room somewhere in London that's full of James Bond stuff, and they got to go through that room. I got to buy a book called the James Bond Encyclopedia and use that as my primary reference in watching as many movies as possible and things like that. And again, here the design challenge for that one was we need to come up with a James Bond game that encompasses all of the James Bond movies, and it's gotta, and so how am I going to do that? And so my answer to that was, let's make the game a James Bond movie. So you have a villain, you have a henchman, you have and each of us has a villain, and each of us has henchmen, and each of us has not, we can't each be James Bond. We can't each be a superhero or a spy with all these James Bond assets. We have Pierce Brosnan, and we have Sean Connery, and we have Roger Moore cards, and like, how are we going to do this? And so I came up with, each card was sort of an aspect of James Bond: the lover, the fighter, the gambler, And so as you playing cards, they're basically, each card was a James Bond skill set. And which you are using to thwart the henchman and overcome the villain and get the girl, all that stuff. And then we got to play with gadgets and all that other kind of stuff. There was a Q expansion so James Bond came out, did pretty well. It was fun. The artwork was it was all movie artwork, but it was James Bond movie artwork, and it was pretty great. They look good. The cards look gorgeous. They had it was giant, bright, and it was shiny, and they used primary colors, and it wasn't all dark and moody. We'll get to Kult in a second. But and it worked really. It was fun. It was a fun game to design. I did follow up immediately with a Q expansion, which was going to have tons of gadgets and things like that. I sort of co-authored that one. There's another game designer and mostly an author named Matt Forbeck, who has written a lot of books, and he was my college housemate back in the day, and he was working with Target and Heartbreaker before he got into his authoring. And other stuff, tons of other stuff. And he did a little bit of work on that one as well, kind of doing color content and copy and all that kind of thing. But the Q expansion, it sits there, doesn't exist. It never came out.
Wow. But cards were written for it, for both.
Every card was written for it. I've got a database with all the cards on it. Still somewhere. It's probably in a format I can't read anymore. But probably on a zip drive or something.
Have to go Indiana Jones, digital Indiana Jones.
Yeah, exactly. Those were super fun to play with.
So there's a couple of things I just want to pull out there before we jump onto Kult, which is a very interesting story. Do you make anything of, I believe some publication printed they were expecting a women's and villains set to come out after that. Do you know anything about that? That was just misinformation, or
that might have been sort of early, someone saying, oh yeah, we got tons of play. We're gonna do Q, and then we're gonna do, they probably started throwing, Bondy things out of the air and saying, they'll come up next. And I think the sales, by then the market's starting to get more flooded, and and finding your space in that market was becoming more and more difficult. And I think it was just easier to make these sort of games as a kind of a one and done. Let's throw spaghetti on the wall and see if it sticks. So I think the decision was just not to proceed with James Bond beyond what they had done.
Well, the similar thing there, I believe there was another opportunity for you to revisit Crow a couple of years later.
Yes. When the Crow 2 movie was being created, this was, there was all the stuff with Brandon Lee's death and all that other kind of stuff, and were they going to make Crow 2 and all that kind of thing. But eventually they were going to make Crow 2. I got a copy of the script early before the movie was released. Wow. There's a few scripts that there's a Mutant Chronicles movie there was a Mutant Chronicles movie that was made that is nothing like the Mutant Chronicles movie script that I saw earlier in the day, which was pretty good. But yes, I got a copy of the Crow 2 script, and now the design job was, let's make this a bigger game with starter sets and assuming that people are going to collect it. And it was a real CCG.
Same like game rule mechanic compatible with the previous one.
Nope, completely different game.
Okay.
In this one, it was much more because if I recall correctly, and it's been a while, Crow 2 was much more. It certainly had its fighting and all that kind of action scenes, but it was also much more ethereal as far as angels and saints and all that other kind of thing. So I was able to turn that into some mechanics where each player, oh gosh, I can't even remember. You actually had a crow, and the crow was sort of like moving between the players as the spirits of the heroes. And you had you had heroes and villains, and you actually had to sort of maintain this balance of good guys and bad guys. It was a much bigger game. I had gotten several games under my belt by that time, and I was really starting to stretch a few more design ideas that I've been collecting. But unfortunately, they just shelved it. It just never happened. Yeah.
Wow. I would love to see any documentation you ever find of that. That sounds fantastic.
There's some somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're clicking through a bunch of old floppy disks one day or whatever,
send
it my way.
I've got a number of games published, but I've got also a number of games that were not published. Yeah.
The plight of the game design.
I know. Yeah, other licenses. The other one, do you remember there was a mecha game back in the day called Heavy Gear? And I worked on a collectible card game for that, where you are shifting between your mecha version and your sort of spy, agent version. Pilot, and you had these worlds and all this other kind of stuff. But again, that just didn't happen. Yeah.
Amazing.
Designed. Yeah.
Wow. Well, the other question I like to ask anybody who worked on a game, especially associated with such a big Hollywood property or something like that, did you get any restrictions or comments or notes from the production companies of those films, like be it the Broccoli family or whoever owns the Crow license?
I personally did not. If any of that happened, and I bet it did, I bet there were some stipulations and some restrictions that were. I never heard of any. If there were some, it would have been through the people dealing with the licensees or the licensors. So it would have been Fred or whoever would have heard that stuff. It would have all had to been approved, and that may have been. That's a really good reason. Or say a side note, one of the reasons that stuff may not have ever made it to market is because it may not have been worth it to go through the approval process with the license owner. Again, I'm speculating there. But no, I never heard anything personally come back, or I don't recall anything. It might have been, if there was anything, it would be like, oh, we don't like the way that this one does. But I mean, with a game, with a property as really sort of, there's not a lot of gray area in James Bond. He's a good guy, there's bad guys, and as long as you just stick with the tropes of the genre, which there's so many of them and they're all sitting right in front of you, and everyone's expecting you to use them, then you're really not going to present anything that's going to be too controversial. I can't imagine you submitting anything odd like James Bond the bureaucrat or something like that. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Nothing. Yeah. Leave that to other characters. Okay, so that brings us to the end of those two licensed games, but we're still not even done with your 1995 outputting. So you have one more game left. Definitely the most infamous of your games, Kult, based on the popular RPG series. Talk to me a little bit about what that process was like, what the design was like. I think it's an incredibly unique and exciting design. Tell me about your experience being approached to do it. Were you the first and only person they approached? Tell me all about it.
Yeah, by then I was pretty well stuck as the CCG guy for Target Games. I mean, my life was literally collectible card games. I was making them and all that kind of stuff. So the next thing that was on the list was the other big role-playing property that Target had was Kult. It's sort of like this splatterpunk, alternate dimension reality that it as a lie. It's that is not my bag, right? I'm not a terribly big fan of that genre. It's fine, but I'm the guy, and a job is a job, and I'm not going to say no. And so, they handed over all of the Kult source material, which was the role-playing game and lots of source books and a lot of really, art that now you look at it and go, yeah, fine. But back in the mid 90s, it was pretty edgy stuff.
I have a quote here from a review from the time that might give the audience a little bit of an impression of what you could interpret it from. So the quote I've got here is the reviewer says, "Looking at Kult can turn your eyeballs inside out and make you want to run them through a washing machine." So it was a rough looking game. Yeah, it was sort of like a Clive Barker.
Yeah, it was very Clive Barker. And one of the best reviews I got was from The Duelist, which was WotC's magazine. They loved it. Well, and approaching this, unlike Mutant Chronicles, which I could really get behind, and all these other kind of things, Kult was a very difficult thing for me to do because I just couldn't. I had my first job was to embrace the setting, and that was very difficult. Yeah, because it just wasn't my thing. So I'm reading through materials and I'm looking at all this stuff, and I keep seeing this aspect in the game, a thing that is in the game called the Taroacum, which is basically a deck of tarot cards. And I went, aha, I'm going to make a game that uses the classic tarot card layout, the Celtic cross, right? So you have two cards, and cards here and cards over there. And I'm going to turn this into this sort of metaphysical game where you and I are playing. We each have our own little Celtic cross of cards, and those represent your fingers on the puppet strings of humanity as you are swaying the population of the world to your way of thinking. Okay.
Yep.
And what transpired from all that is the game design that I am happiest with, that I think is the best design I ever made. It was my most successful design from a game design standpoint. So you start the game with a bunch of markers in the middle of the table, which represent the population of the world. And as we are playing our cards, which represent humans and monsters and places and horrible things, you are slowly moving these tokens from the outer edges to the inner circle of your little Celtic Cross tarot readout, representing those people's those people becoming swayed to your metaphysical way of being, right? And so it turned into this really cool thing where being able to play your cards, you had icons, but if you didn't have those icons available to you, you can basically push away the tokens that you've acquired to basically say, in order to get an aspect that you need that's not really one that you normally would have, some of your followers would be pushed away from you. They wouldn't from you. They wouldn't like that. That's not what I like. That kind of, and this is all happening metaphysically in their subconscious, and it's crazy. So this, and all you had to do was get to be the first player to get a certain number of tokens into the middle of your circle. And just pushing those tokens back and forth was a big aspect of which cards are going to fight each other. How are you going to play cards? Are you going to sway them toward you? Are you going to repel them against you in order to gain resources? It's a great game. And it just so happened, and this was pure, it's pure luck. If you take two starter sets of Kult and open them up, that's the very best way to play Kult. Collecting cards and making decks and building all that kind of thing absolutely works great. But my favorite way to ever play Kult was to take two fresh starter packs and just shuffle them up, knowing that some of the cards in those packs you would not be able to play at all. And that's just junk in your hand. And that kind of works in this setting. It was a fantastic game, and it worked with two players and it worked with multiplayers. And it's one of my favorite games. We came out with one expansion for it and it did okay. But from that review, because the art was pretty edgy, it was very much a horror game. It was very Clive Barker-y, and it was very, some of the artwork was gross, it was like, oh,
flayed bodies and stuff.
He's pulling his eyeballs and stuff like that. So my wife and I'm so proud of this design, and I'm like, oh, it's just not selling that great because of the context. I mean, there were this is the mid 90s, and there were chunks of the country that we're not going to carry that that evil demon game, whatever. So my wife famously said, it's a quote I still use all the time. It's like, you need to make a fuzzy bunny version of Kult. And, and I've got other versions of Kult sort of rattling around, and some are on paper and things like that, to take that game design and make a fuzzy bunny version of it. But yeah, I loved the how Kult turned out. I loved it. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Well, is there anything that, like, was that Inferno set, which was the follow-up to Kult, was that the last you had, or was there another set for that as well? Or
nope, that was it.
That was it. You didn't end up having to work any other
never.
You didn't work on anything else?
Not for Kult.
Not for Kult. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Interesting. So just to remind the audience, we've literally been talking about only games that came out before the end of 1995. So starting at the end of 1994, all that was just before the end of 1995. So eventually 1996 rolls around. After the boom, there's usually a bust. So you have 4 games in market. They're hitting the market. 40 other games hit the US market alone in that time, in that same period between Doom coming out and your other games coming out. How do you start to feel about their success? Are you starting to get worried? Do you think that CCGs are going to be a fad that are going to blow up in a bad way?
Yes, I would say. I would say so. I mean, they're I've still got designs. Dark Eden is there, and there's some other things that I was asked to work on. But in the meantime, we're trying to think up what's next, right? I can. I can talk about Project Doom Zone. I don't think we're there in the calendar yet, but one of the things that we were trying to think of was leveraging this collectible thing and trying to come up with something different. And if there's one thing that Target Games was able to do, is to take their assets and turn it into something else and really work on it. So I started working on a design that was the code name Project Doom Zone, and it was going to be a collectible miniatures game / card game. So we were going to take the assets from Warzone, which was the miniatures game for Mutant Chronicles, and we were going to take the stuff that we knew about DoomTrooper, and we're going to make a new game. And you would buy a blind miniature. This was still metal, right? They would be metal, and so you buy a blind package. In there would be a miniature, the cards that would go with that miniature, and other cards that would work in the game. So you would have a starter set, and that would have just cards for the game, and some starter miniatures. I think those were in plastic. This never got beyond just sort of a alpha stage. And then we would have booster packs that would contain an unknown miniature, some cards to go with that miniature, and some other cards, just to general cards to go in the game. We present. So I spoke about the DoomTrooper World Championships. At the same time that was going on, there was a sort of a worldwide meeting of all the partners of all from international partners of Target came in, and I presented this game to all these people who would be the ones who would make their the local versions, the localized versions of those, right? And the consensus, not unanimous, but almost universal consensus was no one would buy a collectible miniatures game. And a year or so later, Mage Knight came out, and I, to this day, but it was very cool. It was very, very cool, and it would have been super groundbreaking. So that was happening. That didn't happen. And so then we're like, okay, at the same time in the Warzone and the Mutant Chronicles thing, in that setting, Earth has always been this sort of burned out husk, and no one lives there anymore. Turns out people do live there. It's called Dark Eden, and we're going to go back to Earth. And that turned into the Dark Eden card game, which was the follow-up to DoomTrooper. And that was, again, a completely still Mutant Chronicles, but a completely separate game, not compatible at all. Yeah, that was happening at that time.
Okay, so you designed Dark Eden, which is a little different, actually. It's a little bit of a different game compared to DoomTrooper. Mechanically, it takes more of that, like, sort of real-time sort of strategy, base building sort of design, which is a little bit different to the dudes fighting other dudes sort of stuff that you had in DoomTrooper. Was there, and there's some of that introduced at the very end of DoomTrooper. So when that's sort of going out, was this expected to sort of bring the audience over and sort of wave them into this new game?
The last DoomTrooper expansion was Paradise Lost, and that was taking DoomTrooper to Earth, and so we had a lot of cross-pollinating of the resources there, of the art and things like that. So you can play. So all the factions are going into Earth, and we've got new factions that can play in DoomTrooper, things like that. At the same time, Dark Eden is released, which is a completely separate card game, which is, like you said, very RTS heavy. It's very Warcraft and that kind of thing, where the cards represent each of you is in charge of an installation of a home base, and you're putting down farms, and you're putting down barracks, and you're building an RTS sort of home base, and then you're sending out raiding parties to attack the other home base for points. And it was very much in that, and that's where we got much more Euro-y, because you had a whole economy system of you had the resources were food and oil and metal. I don't know what they were. But so if you put a farm card down, that generated food. And if you put warriors and beasts down, those consumed food. So you had to maintain your economy in all these resources. And one of the stages was basically looking at all the resource producers and all the resource eaters, and coming up with a balance. And if you had a positive balance, then you can turn that into money that you can spend. And if you didn't, you had to spend money to pay for that to happen. And so it had this whole economy going on. Meantime, you're also putting warriors out in 2 zones. One zone is just defense to protect your dudes, and one zone is your raiding party to go out and attack the other one. It was very ambitious, and it pretty worked. It pretty well worked. But by then, the market was just glutted. It just, and it made a like, yay, we're out, and people bought it. And a lot of the problem was, as with any game in the entire industry, you get to a point where the publisher says, are we going to spend the money to print more of this? Will we be able to sell another 10,000 boxes of this? If we can't, it's not worth it. And so at the time, it was easier to just say, we're going to make more money on selling a new thing than reprinting an old thing. And that's always been the case in this industry. It's very much the case now. But that's kind of where a lot of that went. So Dark Eden was another very cool game. It worked. It's one of the first of my game designs that I got to play with my kids, who are now in college, but they were younger at the time, and I'm showing them the cards. You're like, can we play this? And I'm just like, yeah, I just need to read the rule book because I don't remember how to play it. It's one of those. But it was a cool game.
So that basically concludes sort of your CCG creation arc. Yes. And what I see there, just from the hour we spent talking about it, is each one you get more confident, a little bit more ambitious. You throw in a little bit of the top-down requirement from be it the property or whatever, and then infiltrate a little bit more complexity to the game. Do you think? What do you think was it more better when it was a little bit simpler? Obviously, DoomTrooper got more and more complex with each expansion, or like the simplicity of something like Crow, or even to a lesser extent, maybe even Kult. Do you think that? What do you think serves a better CCG? Just as a general question. The complexity, or something a little bit lighter that sort of is a little bit more casual?
It's a very good question, and approaching it from a game design standpoint and from a retailer standpoint is a very different answer.
Yeah.
When I look back at my game designs, I'm looking at the stuff that is much more involved from a mechanical standpoint. Kult and Dark Eden are games that I'm much more happy about than DoomTrooper and Crow. There's pieces of all of them that I love, and there's pieces of all of them that I wish I could go back and fix. And we could talk, and that's Digital DoomTrooper. But looking back, the games that are more chunky and they have more stuff to them, that lends to a greater amount of ability to play with those mechanics and have not just the same deck that everybody else has out there. right?
Yeah.
Netrunner was super good at this, right? Netrunner
Yep.
was fantastic at this. It had so many levels and so many moving pieces that you could focus on just this aspect and be just as compatible as someone who focused on this completely different aspect of it. And the asymmetry was beautiful, and it's just a beautiful game. But from from a standpoint of a retailer, I look at something like what was that game that came out a little while ago? Light Seekers.
Yeah. Yep.
Dead simple game.
Yep.
It's a kid's game, right?
Yeah.
And it was fantastic, and it was fun, and it had the cool little things where you could scan the cards in, and we did really, really well with it while it was something that was viable, right? So from a consumer standpoint, more people are, they have lower barrier to entry. Every collectible card game and LCG has built into it an immediate barrier to entry. As soon as it's a few months old, the ability to get new people into that game goes down and down and down and down. It's a very, very difficult thing. Low barrier to entry is a simpler mechanic game, but a more interesting game is going to have more legs, but also have a harder time getting new people into that.
Yeah, it definitely seems like one of those balancing acts that I think all collectible or living card games have to do.
Yeah.
I guess that sort of brings me to a jump on question. Have you ever explored the option of either doing asking Target or Frederick if it would be all right to do print on demand or revive it as a living card game or anything like that?
I haven't, simply because, it's one of those things that's more of a pie in the sky kind of a thing. When I look at Fuzzy Bunny Kult, for example, I play with those designs. I play with the rethemes, and I play with that kind of stuff, mostly in my mind and on a notebook and things like that. But at the same time, when I'm not, I'm either working in marketing or I'm working at a health insurance company, or now I own 2 game stores, and that just simply, and I've got 2 sons and they're in college now. And so all these past 10, 20 years are just like, I've got so many other things going on just for sort of real life stuff. So no, not really. I haven't really thought about, doing it on my own and going, when I think about it, it's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I did a Kickstarter and brought all this back and talked to those guys and get the license and all that kind of thing? And yeah, it would be super cool. And and that's like the little devil on my shoulder going, wouldn't that be neat if you did that? And then a little angel pops up and goes, poof. It's like, you don't have time for that stuff. Yeah. Get your head straight. And so that's kind of what usually happens. Yeah. Maybe someday, but mostly I'm probably going to yield to other folks doing that.
Let's just quickly talk about, speaking of sort of revival, there is a revival of sorts for at least one of your games. Yes. The DoomTrooper CCG now exists on a digital platform. Do you want to tell me how that came about and how you were involved in that?
Yes. So a few years back, there's a company called Secret Cow Level, and they were big DoomTrooper fans when they were younger. I think in their teens and things like that. And they reached out to Fred, and they got the license. So to make an official DoomTrooper online card game. They ran a Kickstarter to get the funding for that, and they're still sort of in this sort of beta system. I was involved early in the process. They basically they flew into Wisconsin, and we sat down in my basement for about 2-3 days, and we just hashed out every aspect of DoomTrooper. I had a lot of I've had 25 years of stewing on the game, and so and they came in as fans and I came in as the designer, and so we had these really great conversations about what's good and what needs to change, and I would come in and say, okay, and I can't think of a specific example, but I don't know, the way that fortifications work is completely wrong. It needs to change, right? And here's how I think it should happen online, and they would sit there and go, but that's not how the game works. And I said, trust me, the game will be better if we did it this way, So it really was me sitting down with all 1,200 DoomTrooper cards that have been in print, and going, this one from all these different sets, and saying, okay, here's how I think we should change the game. Here's how I think this should happen. I think how this would work. I think how the deck construction should work. Here's how I think the card layout should work. Here's how I think the desktop should work. And that's not just me. There's other people in the room are saying, here's what I think. Here's what I think. And we got a lot of whiteboards and a lot of big pieces of paper. And at the end of it, they had a pretty good idea. And then we had a lot of emails going back and forth about how to kind of work this. And then I sat down with my giant spreadsheet of every DoomTrooper card, and I rewrote every single one, and I created new keywords. I made keywords. Keywords was sort of keywords was kind of there was no such thing as keywords when all these games were coming out with, and like, wait a minute, we can just make a keyword. It wasn't until Kult that we thought of keywords, right?
Right.
And so DoomTrooper really didn't have them except for a couple, personality and that kind of thing. It's got a couple of them, but we realized as we kind of started shoving all these mechanics into all this game that we can kind of take a lot of these mechanics, give it a keyword, and instead of rewriting the rules 100 times on all these cards, put it in the rule book, make a living rule book, and blah blah blah. And so they did their Kickstarter, they got their funding, and that was a couple of years ago, and they've been building the game ever since. It's up, it's working. You can if you Google DoomTrooper online, Secret Cow level games, you'll find it, and you can sign up and you can start playing. It's great. They've got a great Discord channel, and this is where I hang my head in shame and I go, and then real life came and started beating me around the head. And so I haven't been as involved in the development of it lately. I was very, very involved in the foundational time of it. And every so often I log in and I play around with the cards and I see what they're doing, and it's great. And it's like, I really don't have anything to add to this. There, at some point you have to go, you know what? This is your baby, this is your,
well, the baby's growing up now.
Exactly. This is your dream. This is your vision. I'm just, the grandpa that comes in and says, well, when I was your age, this is how we did it. Right. And I think you should do this and this and this. And then I walk away. And I would love to be more involved, but again, it's COVID and I'm running game stores and all this other kind of stuff. So
there's a lot of things going on.
It's been crazy. Yeah. So, but it's really great. I recommend all of your listeners go and check it out. It's cool.
Okay. Well, we'll do a formal plug for it at the end. Definitely. Yeah. I just want to quickly ask, so you're saying that they're adding new cards of their own design now?
They have a couple of them. Yes, I do believe they have. Mostly they're using existing cards. Mostly, they're still working on the core set, such as it is, and deck building and as a modern online, anyone who's played Hearthstone knows, that the online CCGs have a brand new set of baggage to come along with them, right? In terms of acquiring cards and crafting cards and deck building and what kind do you get and what's the purchasing model and all that other kind of stuff. So a lot of what they've been working on is A, making sure the game works. But B, making sure now they're at this part where deck building and all that kind of stuff has to be really, really great and really solid for the rest of it to work very well as well.
Just a real quick question. When you had this, this foundational basement meeting, did you also give them any unproduced sets that you had for DoomTrooper? Maybe some future plans that you had or anything like that? Or you just stuck to what came out?
Yeah, there really wasn't anything new to add. It was most of my feedback was really tearing it down and rebuilding it, from ground up,
2.0.
Yeah, like I said, let's make it 5, copies in the deck. Scrap that, make it 3. Later on, I had an idea of every card has a little number on it, and that number is how many copies of that card you can have in your deck. And so. And the other thing is that they're able to do is immediate balancing. They can just say, you can have 2 of this in your deck. Now you can have 3, done.
Yeah.
And so, just from very foundational things of how do the core mechanics work? How are we going to, let's take all the expansions had so many different new keywords and new mechanics. Let's scrap half of them and bundle them together. So instead of, all of these things being they're all essentially different kinds of attachments. So let's make them all just an attachment with a keyword. Now we can talk about keywords and make a better tree instead of a tree that's like this instead of like this. So
well, yeah, like movies and like every other form of art, collectible card games have evolved so much since its primordial years. 1994, we're in a completely different space. Magic is,
right.
Very other ones are living. Vitesse are in all very different spaces to where they were in 1994, and I'm glad to hear that it's DoomTrooper for the modern age, for the modern CCG player.
It is, yeah. It really, they've really given it a nice polish, yeah.
I did throw out some offer to the community, people who still play some of your old games, to ask community questions and stuff like that. Some things that maybe they wanted to hear cleared up, or some interesting things or whatnot.
All right.
So I'm going to
preface this by saying, if it's anything game rules related, I probably have forgotten.
I completely fairly understand. And I do sort of admit those just for ease of there is no mechanical FAQ worthy things here. These are more broad.
Stump the band. Let's go. Yeah.
Okay, let's go. So your first question,
I'm an old man now.
Actually, our first question we answered before, so I will refer to the earlier part in the episode. But I just do want to give Rob Martis credit for asking how involved you were in the DoomTrooper digital version. Yes, and I think that's great. I will refer to the earlier part of the video, but thank you so much, Rob, for asking that question. I do want to ask a question from David Juan Marino Rieva. Do you have any details about an expansion that was unreleased for Kult after Inferno, which I believe before you said you didn't have one?
I seem to recall, here's where Crow 2 and Kult sort of merge in my brain, because I seem to recall this sort of Angels and Demons set, but I think that had to do with Crow. I think that was sort of the subtitle of Crow 2. Okay. My recollection is that I probably had a cadre of ideas for more Kult stuff. But Inferno sat on a shelf for a very long time before it was released.
Almost a year. Yeah,
it was. I was actually very surprised when they released it. I thought it was dead. And then it released, and then it went away. It was out and it was gone. Right. I don't even think I have a full set of it. There's a funny thing. I don't have that many cards. As the designer, they would send me a few boxes. And there was one card that I never got out of packs, and I had to trade for, so I could have a complete set of one of my games. So, but no, I do not recall any plans for another Kult. If there was one, it was probably just in a throwaway conversation. Someone might have said, "Oh yeah, we got a couple planned," and without really, and at the time maybe we did, and then the market got screwy and Inferno sat for so long, and I think they just let it go.
Yeah, sometimes like you said, those throwaway conversations get heard by the somebody the press, and they print it, like we were talking about with the James Bond before. Now, fortunately, David has another question as well. Do you have any recollection of how promo cards for Kult were distributed in English?
There were very few of them. They were usually just magazine inserts like Inquest and things like that. Like I said, we had to have cards that were sort of I don't remember very many promo cards for Kult at all. I think I honestly remember maybe one or two, and they were barely distributed because of the subject matter and things like that. I think some of the magazines were just like, oh, I'm not so sure about that. But if we were to do promo cards during that time, they probably would have been magazine inserts.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I don't recall. Most of the promo cards that we did were for DoomTrooper. And promo cards, that was a really new thing. You looked at Inquest and you looked at Scythe and things like that. And them, one person did a promo card, and then everyone's like, I want to be a promo card too. Right. And so they started getting deluged, and they started to be a little bit more selective and things like that. I don't remember that at all. And it's very likely, it's very, very likely that Target made a promo card without ever consulting me. There were a couple DoomTrooper cards that way where they had a piece of art and someone in the office just said they made some stats and they threw it out there. And they said, oh, by the way, we made these promo cards. And I went, okay,
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for asking David's question. I do have just a handful more questions.
Absolutely.
Jamie Bullen does want to know why is Dark Eden so hard to find in English? Was there something about supply that was an issue? Was it just printed so low, or was it destroyed for tax purposes?
No. And I will preface this by saying that I was very not involved in the actual production and manufacturing process. I was just designer boy. So so once I sent my words to them, they added the pretty pictures and made the cards work. But my understanding is it had a very low print run. It came out, they never reprinted it. They just put it out and let it go. Again, this was right at the end of the bust. And I think that's probably the reason. Yeah.
Right. It's print what we do, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't,
those later games were definitely, Inferno, Dark Eden, definitely both succumbed to just the end of the cycle glut, and they just said, we have the assets, we have orders, we'll print it, we'll make our money, and we'll move on. Yeah.
Okay. So Jamie again has another question that I pulled out only just because I don't know anything about it. And it's a little bit easier to answer the question. How did your wife feel about being represented in DoomTrooper?
Yeah, I asked her first. So there is a card.
I don't know about this. You'll have to fill me in.
Absolutely. There is a card in DoomTrooper called Dr. Diana. My wife's name is Diana. And the provenance of this is, if you look at the if you Google the Mutant Chronicles Cybertronic source book, on the front cover is this big sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger looking guy, and there's other sort of techs that are working on him, and behind him, peeking out from the side, is a blonde woman with a big syringe with a big like green stuff in it. Okay, and my wife is blonde, and I said, okay, I'm gonna get one card in there that's named after my wife. And so there's a few cards that are named after people I know. Let's talk about Billy next. So I called it Dr. Diana. And I made her a personality and things like that. Now, since I did, and that was it. That was done. Now, since that happened, Dr. Diana has actually turned into this whole thing in the Mutant Chronicles universe. It's really interesting when like I just create something on a whim and it turns into something bigger. So if you look at later editions of the Warzone game, the Dr. Diana is now a robot, and she's a field medic, and and in your forces you can like call a Dr. Diana onto the field to like heal up your dudes and things like that. So so that's how it evolved. So was this picture that's like, it kind of looks like my wife. I will name it after her, and then it turns into this other stuff. So but I did ask her about it first. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Well, we talked about Bob Watts before, who's from the game.
He's in the game. Big Bob Watts.
The head of various games. But tell me about Billy. What's going on with Bill?
So if you look at, those who have a copy of DoomTrooper, there is a heretic card, which is this guy kind of, and he's got this long gray hair and things like that. And there is the Billy card, which is another guy with it's kind of a mohawky kind of a thing. Now, those cards have the wrong names. Those should be switched. Because I worked with a guy at Capital City. His name was Billy McDuffie, no longer with us. Just wonderful guy. We had the same birthday. Right. And he had long gray hair, and he kind of, looked like that card, that mutant card. And so I wanted that card to be named Billy, and he was sort of like the leader of the mutants. I'm saying the name wrong, I think, but and so if you look at the mutant card and the Billy card and switch those arts, the Billy card should have the necro mutant art on it, and because it looked kind of like Billy. Very good friend of mine. Yeah. We share a birthday. We share a birthday with Gary Gygax. Billy and I and Gary Gygax all have the same birthday. Yeah. So
who you also shared a book credit with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. It's all connected.
It's all like reality is, it is a lie.
Exactly. Everything Kult was right.
It all kind of comes back full circle. So that go ahead.
I was just going to interject and say that anybody who's watching this on YouTube, if you're watching the video version, I will post, if I can find images of them, both of those DoomTrooper cards below. So scroll down and see them when the video.
If you can't, let me know and I will provide them to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. So that pretty much wraps up community questions. What we do to close out these episodes is even more questions. Who'da thunk it? We have a fun little game called Kracken Questions, where you'll choose one of these booster packs.
All right.
They're sealed. I have no idea what they are in them. There is 3 fun questions in each pack that are common questions and 1 rare game design related question. So let's crack open one of these booster packs. You tell me which color you prefer, and let's see what you get asked to send out the episode.
I want to say blue because everyone probably does blue. I bet less people pick yellow, so I'm going to say yellow.
All right.
We'll try to be the odd person.
All right. Well, let's crack some questions. Let's see what we got in here. All right. So let's see. All right. So first common question. Hang on, give me 1 second. If you were an ice cream flavor, what flavor would it be?
If I was an ice cream flavor, I'm going to say I'm going to answer this question with a story, which is what I do.
Fantastic.
So there in Madison, there is a ice cream vendor called oh my gosh, I can't remember the name, but they're great. Then one summer they needed someone they had to name this ice cream contest, right? And it was banana and had chocolate in it and things like that. And I submitted Monkey Poo as the name of the ice cream. They did not pick that. They went with Fat Elvis, which is another great name. So I'm going to say Fat Elvis just because of that story. So it's bananas and chocolate. Banana ice cream with chocolate bits in it and nuts and things like that. But I think Monkey Poo is a better name for it. Yeah.
Banana flavor definitely sounds like that's the case.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's fantastic. I couldn't ask for anything more. All right. So this one is, I don't know if I got a focus there. Maybe I don't, but it says, what are your thoughts on Magic's Commander format?
I have never played it. And it is growing in popularity. And when COVID ends, I am looking forward to having more Commander events at my store, but I have actually never sat down and played Commander. Now, that being said, my understanding is that there are Warhammer 40,000 Commander decks coming out in the future, and I will absolutely play that because that sounds like a blast. So I will learn how to play Commander, and I will play 40K Commander. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, I think that Commander definitely answers that itch that you were talking about before, that less competitive, more variance itch that a lot more players, a lot more kitchen table players are getting into.
Yeah,
and I think that you'll see Commander supported, especially once they start bringing in outside franchises, like you just mentioned, supported in game stores more frequently, more so than what you see today with more constructed and limited formats.
One thing that I tell customers almost every day is the great irony of owning a game store is I have no time to play games. So so there are a lot of things that I can talk all day about, but I've actually never played. Yeah, and Commander's one of them. But I would like to. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I mean, if it's going to take, if you're going to be motivated, somebody who's around Magic cards all the day to try 40K, I'm sure millions of other will be. So be expected for the Magic audience to grow even further.
Here's hoping.
Right. You haven't been right about that bust yet.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. All right. So, all right. Last common question. Which movie have you seen most?
Well, I probably just through osmosis have probably seen, oh gosh, what's the one that's always just seems to be on? I mean, certainly, you look at the big franchises like Star Wars and and Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know, they always seem to be on, and you're like, oh, Raiders is on, I guess I'll watch Raiders. But the one that I will like sit down and like plug in and actually turn on is probably going to be either Blade Runner, that I actively like decide to set, or Lord of the Rings extended edition trilogy.
Right.
But the one that I'll just sit down and like, man, I get a jonesing to watch is probably going to be Blade Runner or Flash Gordon, the 80s Flash Gordon. Yeah.
I'm not feeling a good falsetto at the moment, but I would sing the lines otherwise. Okay, so last question, ignore the top sentence of it, but last question is, which tabletop games influenced your work the most?
Influenced my work. Yeah. So because I am so old, and a lot of games weren't actually existing yet. Certainly, you know, I actually had some influences in some computer games, to be honest. You know, when you look at Dark Eden, I was playing a lot of Warcraft at the time, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And things like that. But a lot of it has to do, I think a lot of it is war games, is miniatures games, you know, playing 40K, playing, you know, because a lot of my games are part of a universe of other games, with role-playing games and miniatures games, they help kind of design each other thing. But when you look at things like my design for Kult, that is very Euro-y and pulling, pushing, and all that kind of stuff. And gosh, I don't know if there's a game that really encompasses all of that. It's like I have this whole history of a lot of old Avalon Hill catalog games, you know, from not just the war games, but things like Magic Realm, which is this crazy, ridiculous 80-page rule book of a game. This trying to make a role-playing board game back in the 70s, and it's super inefficient, but I love it. You know, I'm gonna have to be really, really disappointing. And I don't know if there's a single game. The problem is I'm surrounded by so many games every day that just kind of pulling one out as, you know, if I was more of a consumer game designer, as opposed to someone who then got into something where I am surrounded by so many games all of the time. It's hard to say. You know, poker has a big influence, you know, just that part of it. You know, that kind of bluffing and that kind of thing. Oh man, I have to really think about that one. That's one you should feed ahead of time, because that's a good question. That's a good question. Yeah. That's so disappointing. Yeah, sometimes rare cards are splashy. Sometimes they're overly complex. Yeah, this one lands somewhere on that scale. Me. Well, let me just say about your game design this is an odd compliment, but I feel like, I don't know if you're familiar with the filmmaking term auteur. Yeah. But it basically, I used to be a film major. One of those. Sorry? I used to be a film major. Well, then you very much know what it means. And if the audience doesn't, it basically just means basically a filmmaker with a specific style that is recognizable. You as a CCG designer, I don't know if there's another one, but you're certainly one of the only ones I would point to as an auteur. There are certain mechanics that show up in each of your games that you can play it. And if you're familiar with DoomTrooper and you play 007, you're like, oh, or even Crow, you're like, oh, that's a little bit like that thing. Like, I sort of recognize it. Some examples I guess I would have is concealed discard piles. Yeah. You had a lot of like discard piles go face down and you're not allowed to look at them throughout the game. Whereas the common CCG vernacular is it's open information. Right. Another one was characters not tapping, but turning sideways to represent that they've been hit once. And then once they're hit again, they're actually discarded. So that's another little thread there that I found fascinating amongst your games. And the other thing is, especially considering the time it came out, all your games tend to require gaining something rather than taking something away from someone else. That is an absolute core element of a lot of my designs. I am a big, you look at Euro games and you look at sort of Ameritrash is what they, is the unpopular term there, but I'm going to use it. Is, where Euro games tend to be about collecting and building, and the more thematic games are more about breaking. A lot of the things you mentioned are really in direct, just basically me addressing things about Magic and other games at the time that I did not like. I don't like games where you lose. Yep. The goal of the game is not to make you lose, it's to make me win. And I'm glad you brought this up, because that is really a foundational element of how I approach things. I win because I built something, not because I broke your stuff. And yep. And so, yeah, that's why you see that kind of thing. Things like the face down, that kind of thing. That's more of me being like, I'm going to make you remember things. So that kind of, that's yep. me being just devilish. But yep. that kind of thing, definitely in all of my games, I'm winning because I brought something over on this side of the table, not sent something to your side, generally speaking. Yep. Yeah. Now, during that process, I might break some stuff. But I'm going to earn things for doing that. It's the reason I'm doing that, and it's to build myself up, not to break you down. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting to speak to where we were before about the competitive nature of Magic and stuff like that. Sometimes that is that psychological thing of attacking someone. Like Keyforge is about building something, right?
Right.
Yeah. Whereas Magic is about taking something away, and that's where you get that division of communities. People who are sometimes very into Magic have something to prove. They have something to take away from someone else, or to throw out to the world and attack somebody
the 4
else.
card kill. Yeah.
Exactly. Or turn 1 or turn 2 kill, or whatever it is.
That's the one piece of advice I give to new Keyforge players, is say, don't get stuck in combat. Combat, you do not win by fighting. And they go, oh, okay. And it takes people a little while to realize that. So yeah, I love that. There's another reason I love that game. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is our conversation for today. I want to just thank you so much, Bryan, for coming on the show, and especially at such late notice. It was fantastic. It was great to revisit so many of your games once more. Let's just hit on a few things. So you are I'm Board Games in Madison, Wisconsin, and somewhere close by.
It's if you look at Madison, 2 of the suburbs are Middleton and Sun Prairie. So Madison's in the middle, and my stores are on the bookends of Middleton and Sun Prairie on the east and west sides of the town. Yeah, but it's Madison. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So that's I'm Board Games. Do you guys do online sales as well?
We don't. I have an online store that I set up during COVID times to do local pickup, and so people can shop from home and things like that. But I don't ship things. No, I'm a pure brick and mortar retailer. Yeah,
love it. Old school, perfect. So if you're in the Madison area, by all means stop by when they're fully open again, or when travel is safe. If you're seeing this in the future,
we're open now. You can come visit.
Oh, excellent. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So by all means, stop by. Also, DoomTrooper, I guess it's DoomTrooper, the digital version is now available. Is that on Steam? Like, how do people play that?
Yeah,
it's on Steam. Look it up on
Google Secret Cow Level or DoomTrooper online, and that'll get you to it. But is it on Steam? The last time I looked, there was a separate app that you downloaded that got you into it. So it actually may not be on Steam yet. My apologies to Secret Cow Level for not knowing this. If you just get to their website, there will be instructions on how to get to it. Yeah.
Fantastic. So check out the new, basically DoomTrooper Redux version, and jump on now. Like, who knows if they're looking into collectible versions and stuff like that, this could be a thing that grows.
Yeah, and they're always looking for new people to come in and play and test and try it out, and it's completely rebuilt DoomTrooper. It's still the DoomTrooper that you'll recognize and love, but there's a lot of foundational changes that I am super happy about. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, yeah, exactly. Check it out. It's probably super easy to get involved. It's free, right?
Right now, yes.
Excellent. Yep. Well, get on while it's free. There is no reason not to. Okay, that is it from me. Thank you so much for everyone watching.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Goodbye from my end. Goodbye from you, Bryan.
Take care.
Excellent.
Yes.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. There will be links for Bryan's website and stuff like that you can check in the links below. Again, thank you so much. And remember, until next time, keep shuffling. Thanks so much for checking out the episode. And thank you so much to Bryan for sharing some of those stories. Now, Bryan and I actually had a much longer conversation than what you've just seen. We ended up going deep on some other important collectible games topics and some more recent ones. So what I'm going to do is in the next week after this episode, I'm going to post a bonus episode with Bryan, and we are going to discuss the current trend of the collectible trading card game market, what his perspective is as a retailer and a designer, and what he thinks is going to happen moving forward. It was illuminating to get some of that information. Also, subscribe if you don't want to miss that. We have an episode as well coming up at the end of the month with somebody from Decipher, talking about the Star Wars trading card game, talking about the Star Trek trading card game, and a whole bunch of other collectible trading card games they've worked on throughout their career. Now, as always, at the end of these episodes, I like to ask for any feedback you have on the episodes. You can either let me know in the comments below, or in the links in the description, you will find a link to our Facebook and our Twitter. That's CCG History. I would love to hear your opinions on the episode. Also, if there is a collectible trading card game you want to hear the history of, let us know as well via those channels, and hopefully we'll be able to bring you some info on it at some point. Thanks so much for watching again. I can't wait to bring you another episode. Until then, goodbye from me, and keep shuffling.